But this evening, we have with us this evening two stories of whistleblowing almost 5 decades apart. Our first guest is Daniel Ellsberg, perhaps the most famous whistleblower of all. And in leaking the Pentagon Papers, which reveal details of the build-up to the war in Vietnam, he quite literally changed the course of history. Our second guest is Brittany Winner, sister of US intelligence specialist Reality Winner, who leaked details of Russian interference in the US elections of 2016 and found herself incarcerated as a reward. Reality herself can't be with us this evening because she's not allowed to talk about what she did. Brittany has written a rather wonderful piece for our summer edition, and we're very grateful to have her here this evening. But I thought I'd begin by asking Daniel first, just to talk about, this extraordinary career you've had following your original career as a whistleblower, and how you believe things have changed within the landscape of whistleblowing over those years. Rather a general question, I realize, but let's kick off in that way.
Well, first, there's just a technical change of considerable scale. When I was copying the Pentagon Papers starting in October 1st, 1969, and copied them and gave them at first to the Senate, the cutting edge technology of the time, you could say, was Xerox. And without that, if I had, it's not possible to think that I could have copied 7,000 pages and made a number of copies of them, or even a large fraction of that. So to my knowledge, I'm not aware of there having been a leak of that scale ever before. There were many leaks, of course. None had been prosecuted because of our First Amendment, which had been held by Congress always to preclude a British-type Official Secrets Act. They don't have a First Amendment, freedom of the press. They're clearly explicit in a written constitution. We do. We had a revolution, and we don't have the Official Secrets Act, which criminalizes any and all release of classified information, protected information inside the government to unauthorized persons. Whatever the motive, whatever the circumstances, it's flatly illegal, what they call a strict liability law. Intentions don't matter. So that gets you into the legal dimension of where there has been a change. Now, since then, of course, I could not have done what Chelsea Manning or Ed Snowden did in the way of releasing hundreds of thousands of documents, even millions of pages, possibly. I've never seen a full count, but that could not have been done with Xerox, of course, and without the digital change. So the ability to put out large amounts of information is enormously changed. At the same time, the ability to check who downloaded that information or who conveyed it, who put it on a web drive or whatever, has greatly increased. In other words, the counter whistleblowing, counter espionage, if it was a case of espionage, but which these aren't, of course. So that's a change. Both have changed. What we have not seen is a real exploitation of that change in terms of great emulation of either Snowden or Manning. I'm sorry to say, for that matter, I was very disappointed that I had to wait 39 years for someone to use, in effect, a digital or Xerox to do essentially what I'd done. It just didn't happen, despite the fact that it's widely regarded, rightly or wrongly, as having had a real influence on the war, the length of the war, and the fact, which actually is even more miraculous than people realize, but the fact was that I did get away with it in the sense that, unlike Chelsea, I didn't spend 7.5 years in prison. Unlike Snowden, I'm not in permanent exile, anything like that. So they weren't able to do to me what Nixon had in mind, which was to put me in prison for 115 years. Or 35 with good behavior, if I'd had good behavior. By the way, since we're talking about reality winner here. In either of those periods, we could have done, in principle, what reality did. As I understand, I don't know the actual scope of pages that she was involved in, but my impression is it was relatively small, basically a cable or two, one page, basically. Is that right? And that's also true, Martin, of Catherine Gunn, basically one page. And there, what you have, the contrast is, in all of these cases, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of people who had access, one way or another, authorized or not, but who had access to that information, of which a very large fraction probably did recognize that it was revealing crimes by the government. As Snowden has said, nearly everybody he was working with understood that what they were doing was unconstitutional and was, clearly forbidden by our Fourth Amendment, and amounted to total surveillance of everyone. But they didn't put anything out, not one page or a million pages. And in reality's case, I don't know how many people saw that. I'm sure it would be a very large number. And so you have this. You have the fact that now, as then, it's extremely rare for someone to risk their careers, risk their clearance, and even risk prison. But even without the prison, to risk their access to classified information, their job, their importance in the government, to take any risk in order to inform the public, even when they recognize that the public does need to know this or should know this information. And even though it's become physically much more easy to put out this information if you're willing to take the risk, which is high. And of course, the last point I'll make is, obviously the intent of these punishments, in my case, the intended punishment didn't come through, is to slow down people, stop them from emulating that, from acting on their awareness that this information is being wrongfully withheld. It remains surprising to me, a matter of something I want to try to understand. I've spent 50 years at it now, as to why there are as few as there are. In other words, I've mentioned 3 people, including myself. You could certainly mention others, Catherine Gunn, very definitely. Others like Tom Drake and some others who didn't, I think, initially mean to, well, okay, I'll just include them, but you still get down to a very small number. So granted, I shouldn't expect with these kind of punishment in store a large number of people to do it with what we know about human nature. I think it is surprising for someone who's lived 90 years as I have, it's still surprising that almost no one does it. And I think that's very problematic. When you talk about the whistleblower as being the lifeblood of a, how did you put it, a democracy? Democracy, which I think is true, although that wouldn't seem to suggest that democracy has a long life ahead of it, that the prospects are very good. I mean, it seems to be on a kind of low blood pressure here. And it would imply, if it's really that important to democracy, that the absence of it is very dangerous to democracy. Well, that's the truth, I think. In the area we're talking about here, especially foreign policy, military, war and peace, lives like that, life and death matters like that. The for a number of reasons, it just doesn't happen. And so democracy, we've got to make do without it, or is there some way to increase the amount of it? I would have to say that, although it's very gratifying to me after 39 years that Chelsea Manning in 2010 did put out this information, and 3 years later, Snowden did. But to say that that's the sum of it does not, I think it is serious that the absence of that is very ominous for the future of democracy. Oh, and I was about to say, we don't really have democracy in foreign affairs to a significant degree. It is a matter of esoteric actions in secret, by elites, done for very specialized interests, and the public has very little influence over it. And the result, I say, is wars, imperial wars like Vietnam, Iraq, all the other places we're involved now, Somalia, Sudan, Afghanistan, certainly. We're still bombing people in Afghanistan, I notice, despite the fact that our president has come to terms with the idea that we should stop killing people in Afghanistan. But he hasn't done it. And perhaps he will. So we'll see.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that incredibly clear run through of the situation we find ourselves in. And I would at some point like to return to this idea of whistleblowing and the normalization of whistleblowing and why that hasn't happened. But first, I'd like to bring Brittany in. We obviously have another guest as well. And as my next question is about the effects of whistleblowing on extended family, on family life, and on the psychology of whistleblowers. Of course, one of the striking things to note about Reality's incarceration is that she will have missed a large degree of her of the growing up of the little person in front of us right now. So maybe Brittany, you could enlighten us a little bit about what the effects have been of the incredibly draconian punishment that Reality faced.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for having me on today. I appreciate the opportunity to write the article about Reality, and I appreciate talking to you and everybody who's listening. Thank you so much for caring about my sister Reality. It's been really hard. So from the moment that Reality was arrested and I've found out, why she was arrested and what she was being charged with, it's been hard on our family because we are suddenly thrust in the spotlight that none of us asked for, right? I had nothing to do with Reality's decision to leak the document. I had nothing to do with her, horrific interview with the FBI where she wasn't Mirandized, by the way. I had nothing to do with her.
Sorry, for our non-American viewers, could you maybe explain what that is?
Sure, absolutely. So if you ever watch any sort of crime show or cops show that takes place in the United States, one of the first things that happens when you're under arrest is you say that the police officer is supposed to say to you, you're under arrest. Anything you say can and will be, used against you in a court of law, et cetera. And while Reality wasn't under arrest, she was boxed in by 11 FBI agents in her tiny, tiny home. She did not feel like she was free to go. And they should have told her that anything that she said could be used against her, but they didn't tell her that so that they could get a confession from her. It's just the little tricks that that they used to really nail my sister Reality to the wall for releasing this document. And one of the most horrifying things about this experience was reading Reality's Wikipedia page, to be honest, because that Wikipedia page, I urge everybody to go and take a look. It completely paints Reality as a terrorist. And I'm the person in this world who knows my sister, Reality Winner, the most. I know how she thinks. I know who she is as a person. And I can tell you right now, she is not a terrorist. She never meant to harm the United States. And in fact, there's no evidence that the document that Reality released even did any harm or even could do any harm, because the Russians already knew that we had this information. And so if my sister, by leaking this document showing that the Russian GRU attempted to hack into the voting systems of different United States by sending spear phishing emails, if that information didn't harm US national security and only benefited the citizens who want their vote to count, then what crime actually took place? What did Reality do that was so bad? And so hearing the media, hearing the government vilify her was just horrific. And psychologically on me, psychologically on my mom, it was really rough. But I think the person that is damaged the most is my sister, Reality Winner, because she started to believe that. She started to internalize that about herself, that, oh, all of these people think I'm a bad person. I'm in prison right now. I must be a bad person. And I kept telling her, reality, you are not a bad person. You're a good person and you don't deserve this. And soon people will recognize that and will get you out and you will have a beautiful life. You know, the thing that we want the most is a pardon from President Joe Biden. We want reality to be able to live her life without this felony conviction on her record, to be able to seek gainful employment. And we want her just to have her life back, just to be a normal person, just to do the things that normal people can do, because she doesn't deserve to suffer her whole life for this decision that ultimately protected our election. And that's why the 2020 election was the most secure presidential election in US history.
I think that's the most striking point of your article, Brittany, is this point that you make, that what she did safeguard the 2020 election. That was a patriotic act that allowed that election to be declared as safe as it was. And the irony is, of course, that she is now in a position where she can't vote herself. And this seems to be, to me, one of the most tragic aspects of this case, that this was very much contributing to the lifeblood of democracy. And I just really, I was going to say to you, really, that you must take back to her my impression of reading the article, which was just that very important point that what she did was safeguarded democracy.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely will. Thank you very much.
And following on from that, Dan, I think one of the most important aspects of the whistleblower's job is to offer solidarity to other whistleblowers. And one of the things that's been very obvious, and one of the benefits of the internet age, is that whistleblowers can connect themselves with each other in a way that perhaps they couldn't in your era, when you, I'm sure, felt very isolated. So do you have any advice for future whistleblowers, or indeed for reality herself?
Well, it's perhaps to prepare them for the bad news of how it is going to affect their lives. Well, for one thing, I do make a point of trying to get in touch with whistleblowers when they're revealed, and we're talking now mainly about people who are being prosecuted. That is, their identities have been known by themselves or others. There's a lot of leaking that goes on that is anonymous. In the first instance, I would say, in view of the legal aspects as they have evolved in this century in particular, I would advise people to be anonymous to the extent possible. Actually, Ed Snowden and I each revealed ourselves because we didn't want other people to be suspected and have their careers destroyed just on suspicion when we knew they hadn't been involved. So we'd always intended, and obviously Ed had intended, to reveal himself at the time the information came out. Chelsea, I've learned through an intermediary that she had a full intention of revealing herself for the same reason, eventually, very, very shortly actually, but that she was arrested almost immediately, didn't have that opportunity. So I've met a lot of them. And another reason I want to meet them is that I feel very great identity with it, very great empathy, even though the backgrounds are enormously diverse and different from mine in every case, and yet we share something that is not immediately obvious. The reason that we had access to this information was that we had kept our mouths shut for years. We gave access. We had shown ourselves to be reliable secret keeper, and that, almost in every case, that meant keeping secrets that should not have been secret. So we have that background. We evolved from being a person who saw their loyalties in those terms to a person who saw a loyalty to the Constitution, for which we had signed an oath, raised our right hands. The oath was not to keeping secrets, and it was not to the president. It was to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, it turns out, of course, that reality, like everybody else in that period, was working for a domestic enemy of the Constitution, and not just one. I saw Cheney in those terms in particular, but Trump more and more revealed himself as never more than in the last year, of course, in insisting that he's still president, despite having gotten fewer electoral votes, as well as 7 million fewer votes, actually. But how about foreign enemies of the Constitution? Now, they don't have, the foreign people don't have loyalty, haven't sworn loyalty to the US Constitution. But yes, what reality revealed was our knowledge of the fact that the Russians were, in fact, working against or preparing to subvert in one way or another our electoral process. So here on 2 counts, you had something that it wasn't in President Trump's interest, as he saw it, to reveal that the Russians were interfering in the process. He was denying that, all despite the fact that his intelligence people were telling him that that was the case. Why he was that close to the Russians, we really don't know to this day. My own guess is, it's just speculation, that it's a combination of their having something on him from the past, that kind of blackmail, and also having commercial interests in hotels in Russia and elsewhere that he hoped to make money with the Russians. But for one reason or another, he was not prepared to reveal that they were intervening in our election process in the way that we do so routinely over the years, all over the place, both in developed and underdeveloped countries, and had done in Russia, as a matter of fact. That didn't make it okay for the Russians, and it wasn't okay for us in the first instance. But the knowledge of that was worth knowing by Congress and was being wrongfully withheld. So meeting these people, you say, what advice could one give them? Expect that the full weight of the government will come down on them. And aside from that, the problem of ostracism, I don't actually know in reality's case specifically. And of course, we know that she does have many supporters outside, including me and many others. But I would like to know more whether she did or did not have the usual experience, which is to become a pariah within her own peer group, her colleagues and others. The fear that she was in some way impinging on their job opportunities just by their knowing her. They become a kind of leper, and losing your friends, basically. As I say, I don't know. Maybe Brittany, I'm sure, does know more about that. But that's true in nearly all the cases. You lose all your friends, the ones who have clearances, and that may be everybody you know, as it was in my case, pretty much after 10 years of working in the classified area, and it will impact on your family. Really was not married, as far as I know, right? But the pressure this puts on a family is very often fatal to relationships. The norm for according to one study that's been made, for the length of a marriage after whistleblowing is 18 months. The pressure is just greater than the other spouse signed up for. Pressure on their friends, family, career, job opportunities, and whatever. So these are very serious prices to pay. And you're talking about what would I say to whistleblowers? Well, they've already made the choice. But if I was talking to people otherwise, don't do this unless very serious stakes are involved. The lives of many other people and or great damage to the Constitution, as in the case of Ed Snowden. To a somewhat lesser effect, a lot lesser effect, reality, just in the sense that we really don't know what the Russians did, how much they did, on the scale, what use they made of it, how much it affected the election. Certainly, if it helped Trump get elected, that was not good for our Constitution. And I'm sure, by the way, we have no indication that it was as important as some other factors in that situation. But still, it was in the wrong direction. So in short, the price is great unless there's a lot at stake. And that is not uncommon. It's very common for people in the national security apparatus in particular to be facing issues where a tremendous amount is at stake. And it can be worth paying a very great personal price. Definitely can be worth and should be considered. That doesn't mean that everybody has to do it when they look at the alternatives and everything, but it does mean it can make a difference, which if you don't want to do anything, you would like to believe it's impossible to make any difference. Well, that's not true. And the odds are not great, actually, for actually making a difference, even if you do get, if you change people's awareness. It may not change the situation much, but it can. And that is a very great challenge.
Can I just ask, we do have some fantastic questions from our audience, so I do want to move on to those quite quickly. But just briefly, Brittany, I did just want to ask you and your mother have been effectively running Reality's campaign. Is there anything you'd just like to say to people listening today about what they can do to help? What would be, from your perspective, what would be the best thing that people can do from around the world?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I need to give credit where credit is due. Wendy Muir Collins actually has been working more with my mother than I was able to for about 2 years. Right after Reality was arrested, I was actually working for a Department of Defense funded government laboratory. And so
right.
I couldn't speak out. I was literally receiving trainings where Snowden's face was on the screen and it said, don't be an insider threat, or like how to look for insider threats. And I'm like, the day that my sister's face shows up there, I'm walking out of this room, was kind of the situation that I was in. The best thing that people can do is go to standwithreality.org. And on standwithreality.org, there is a petition for Reality's clemency or pardon. And so we want to show President Joe Biden that there are many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of American citizens, of European citizens, world citizens, people who care about Reality and think that she deserves a pardon. I would ask that if people are able to, please talk about Reality in their personal lives. Please tweet or use other social media platforms to spread information about Reality. We firmly believe that if we as Reality's family get enough outcry, particularly from the international community, if we get enough outcry, we can move the needle and we can pressure and convince President Joe Biden to pardon my sister, Reality Winner, because there is no political cost in him doing so. Reality has already served 4 years in prison. She's set to serve another 3 years of probation, which we don't believe that she needs to go through. She's served her sentence. She's expressed remorse. Reality has never been a violent person. She will never have access to classified information again, so she's not going to reoffend. Reality is just a beautiful, wonderful soul, and all she wants to do is good. And all of you watching and all of you listening can help her live her life, and she deserves at least to be able to live her life. So please, whatever you find in yourself to do, whether it's going to standwithreality.org, signing the petition, or tweeting about Reality, or talking about her on different social media platforms, please do so, because we need your help.
That was I stand with you, very well expressed, Brittany. I certainly endorse that. And I think you have to mention, just in the last week or two, Daniel Hale has been sentenced to 45 months in prison for revealing a murderous drone campaign. In the sense of, when I say murder, I'm talking about his revelation that 10 to 20 times as many people who were not targets of the scheduled attack are killed in the course of getting one suspect. In other words, what Julian Assange rightly called collateral murder, in the sense of foreseeable, avoidable assassinations of people, including many people who are innocent even by our standards of imperial standards, are no threat to anyone, essentially, get killed in this process. And of course, Julian himself is in prison right now, awaiting an appeal on I'm sorry, well, our government is pressing an appeal of the decision to release him, in the sense, by his judge in the UK, who said has rejected extradition on the grounds of what that would mean for him in terms of sanity, in terms of survival, suicide. And she said, in effect, refused the extradition. Trump, in his last days, almost virtually his last day, appealed that, in the sense, no, keep him in, bring him back here. And Biden renewed that appeal in a case where the government, the administration of which Biden had been part, the Obama administration, where he was vice president, had declined to indict Assange on the clear-cut grounds that that would be a blatant violation of the First Amendment, just as it would be if he had worked for the New York Times. And it's clear that if Assange is extradited and convicted under that, the New York Times will be, if not next, definitely in line for that. So that this life's blood that you mentioned is going to be reduced even to more of a trickle than it is now. And finally, when you're saying warning whistleblowers, it's a lifetime effect, because you, as you say, lose the clearance. That removes you from an enormous amount of employment that you might otherwise have. But also, they'll go after you indefinitely. Chelsea Manning went back into prison rather than testified to a grand jury against Julian Assange. Craig Murray is just gone into prison now on a revelation on a leaked case, which is very likely, as I read the case, a punishment for his revelation as a British ambassador to Uzbekistan of the torture, including boiling people alive, of the government, which he was being ambassador to. Well, they couldn't put him in prison for revealing that. And I think that has bearing on the fact that he is getting an unprecedented prison sentence now for an offense at this point. So it can pursue you indefinitely. You're making a life change, and it can be worth doing.
Can I just come in there, Dan? We've had a question from Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, some of which you preempted, in fact, with your answer about Julian Assange. But one of the points that I think an important point that Rebecca has made is that one of the developments we've seen over the decades is that we've had this division within the public consciousness between good whistleblowers and bad whistleblowers. So I can remember standing in a cinema in San Francisco at a screening of Official Secrets, where the whole audience stood up as one to give you and Catherine a standing ovation. And you were seen as good whistleblowers, right? In the public consciousness. I mean, not by some people within the establishment. But Julian Assange, in some ways, has been successfully represented as a bad whistleblower. The same has happened to a certain extent with Reality Winner as well, bad whistleblower. How has this come to pass, do you think? How has this particular phenomenon emerged?
I'm not sure why Reality has been stigmatized as much as she has. I don't know a basis for singling her out in any sense as a bad whistleblower. Maybe Brittany knows the answer to that, but I don't. Julian earned the enmity of a very large number of people in the world for what he did in 2015 and 16, which was seen as consciously helping Hillary Clinton lose and Trump winning. He's not indicted for that at all. That raises questions of judgment. His judgment as political judgment at that time, not so much as a journalist. But and he wasn't the only one in that position. There were a number of progressives that I know actually who felt that the Democratic establishment was so bad, represented by Hillary Clinton, that Trump would be no worse, possibly even better. He was not alone in that. I think it was an enormous misjudgment. I don't know whether they've rejudged that or not. But in any case, it's not even involved in the extradition case that he's facing right now, which had to do with 2010, the information that Chelsea Manning gave him long before that, when Obama was president, actually, and the issues that it poses for journalists are in 2010, where I helped him at one point in London. I introduced him as he was revealing the Iraq war logs. At that point, he'd already released the Afghanistan and the collateral murder. And I think it was important to get that information out then, and to extradite him now and convict him is an ominous prospect for every journalist and publisher in this country and even abroad. Since he's not an American, we're pulling him back to the U.S. for something he did abroad and not as an American. So I think that people should understand that the personality here is irrelevant. Having said that, the fact is that I have met a number of these people, not reality as it happens, and I'd be glad to meet her. And I don't know whether I don't even know her politics. I don't know whether she'd be glad to meet me, and I could understand it either way. But I feel that she did the right thing, actually, and that she's like the other whistleblowers that I've met. And I totally reject this notion, which has been there for now 11 years, since Chelsea Manning in 2010, that suddenly they've discovered that Ellsberg was a good whistleblower, something I didn't enjoy from these same people for previous 40 years or so. And in order to say, I'm not against all truth-telling, there are times when it can be justified, even if you promised not to tell. There can be times when revealing crimes of the government are worth doing, even if the government goes after you as a result. But so they want to show. So Ellsberg, they look for an example where they can say this was okay, and almost all of these people then bring out spurious differences between me and these others to justify the idea that they can condemn this recent example without condemning it all. And I totally reject that. I think in every case, of course, there are differences in every single case, different personalities, different ages, different motives. And yet, in every case that I know, that I've seen, I don't know examples to the contrary, the motivation involved telling the truth that had been in one's eyes, and I don't know in a case where they were wrong about this, had been wrongfully withheld and needed to be out. I find that in every case of these whistleblowers that are prosecuted. And that is something that can't even be introduced to the jury, because with the charges that are made under the Espionage Act, Strict Liability Act, motive doesn't matter. Just did you put this out? When regulations called for you not to give it to a newspaper man or whatever. And they can't even argue in front of the jury, as Brittany was saying, the lack of bad impact or the reality of good impact and the intention of it. None of that can be argued, which means that under the current law, the Espionage Act, as it's interpreted now, none of these people can get a fair trial or has gotten a fair trial. And that's what gets most of them to give a guilty plea of some kind to avoid getting an even longer sentence in an unfair trial. And so that needs to be changed. The Espionage Act should be found to be unconstitutional, amended to allow a public interest defense, at the very least. And really, we should change the norms here in terms of whether a person has a right to keep these secrets, even if whether simply sign an agreement that my employment depends on keeping these secrets. Does that give you a right to keep them when other lives are going to be lost by keeping that promise? I would say not. But currently now, that's the situation. It's telling the truth is an alienable right, apparently, one you can sign away when you get employed.
Can I just briefly bring Brittany back in at this point, because I think it would be good for you to address this idea of the kind of good and the bad whistleblower. I think it's a very important. It's an important distinction that that those who don't want the truth to come out are trying to make. And I think Dan's very powerful testimony there about not allowing this divide and rule policy to succeed.
Dan, you are a breath of fresh air, because you are saying everything that we have tried to shout from the rooftops for these past 4 years, that Reality was in prison. So Reality was a bad whistleblower because, first of all, she was a woman, which is unique, different, right? So she was a 25. Yeah, sure.
It's not unique, but it's unusual. Yeah.
Oh, sure. Okay. She was a 25-year-old woman who came from a small town in Texas, and she had posted some things on her social media accounts about Trump. She had, she clearly did not vote for him in the election. Reality was very outspoken about her political beliefs. And so those were the kind of things that were used to vilify Reality. So for example, Reality tweeted that Trump is an orange fascist, which I think is an insult to both oranges and fascists, worldwide. But, so the government was able to slant the opinion of the judge, which you think about where Reality was arrested. She was arrested in Georgia. She was arrested and she was kept in a rural county jail in Lincolnton, Georgia, where there's nothing there, right? And she just had a really stacked judge against her. She was denied pretrial release 4 times, even though she did not pose any risk to society. So Reality could not even get out of jail prior to her trial. No amount of money would be able to let her out. And every time on the news, I see that people who have murdered people who have committed terrible crimes, people who are flight risks, who have a lot of money, they get a bail. And my sister, who had almost no money to her name, who they already took her passport, she has no international contacts. Where is she going to go? She's going to go nowhere. But they kept her in prison, just like Dan was saying, to wear her down so that she would take the plea deal. And when she was sentenced to the record-breaking 63 months, the prosecution team actually had a party where they served champagne and they won awards for getting Reality this sentence. And so Reality was used as an example to deter other leakers in the Trump administration, so that other people would see, oh, look what happened to Reality. We're not going to leak the truth. We're not going to become a whistleblower because that's going to happen to me.
Yeah, I think that's it's true that the authorities have become all the more sophisticated in the way that they are able to mount their attacks on whistleblowers. Which brings me really to the question that Dan has raised about strict liability and the use of the Espionage Act, and in a sense what the American government has learned from the British government with our Official Secrets Act. Now, there are plans afoot to strengthen our Official Secrets Act in this country, which is one of the toughest pieces of secrecy legislation in the world, where there is no public interest defense at all. And there are plans afoot to make this even more severe. We have a question that's from Barry White saying the following: here in the UK, the government's planning to strengthen the already restrictive official secrets legislation. And if they get their way, it could mean that journalists will be dealt with more severely than spies even. Increased powers for the police to search journalist material, and there will be no public interest defense for breaching the Official Secrets Act. There's a chink of one at the moment, but what action should we be taking against these measures, which will be a further attack on our democratic right to know and hold power to account? It's a bit of a British-based question, but I know Dan is very familiar with the Official Secrets Act.
Well, I am, despite being an American, because I've had to. The point is that we have the Justice Department, starting with my case, and there's an irony here. Just in the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers, I learned something. I'm studying this all the time. I'm always learning things. This was surprising. For 50 years, I've been saying without any challenge that mine was the first use of the Espionage Act against someone for giving information to the public. The first one since Nathan Hale, Washington spy, who was hanged for giving information to the British, hanged by the British, the one who said, "I regret that I have but one life to give for my country." And I said, after Nathan Hale, I'm the first one to be tried for giving information to Americans. And actually, I just learned this last month, that's not true. There was a man named John Nickerson. Somehow, no one's ever heard of him. And I've just come across it. Two people have informed me of it because of this anniversary. So he didn't get a lot of, well, he did get attention at the time, and somehow it's been forgotten. In any case, the point is that they've been using the Espionage Act as an Official Secrets Act, as if we had passed an Official Secrets Act, which, another little known fact, Congress did pass on a voice vote in October of 2000, actually the last days of the Clinton administration, and Clinton vetoed it as a violation of the First Amendment and bad for democracy in this country. And hasn't, so there was the one time actually that Congress had voted, but such an act has never been signed into implementation. But as I say, they've been using it as if Congress had passed an Official Secrets Act. Now I have to say, let me ask you, Martin, I've never had a chance to ask this, Britt, before. Obviously, democracy is not dead in Britain, and they have lived with an Official Secrets Act all this year, and they have used it all these years, and they have used it all this time. How much difference do you feel it would make, and you know American journalism as well, over here if we did just in effect openly, if the Supreme Court said, okay, it is constitutional, and we do have an Official Secrets Act now. Do you, as a Brit who has lived in both of these worlds now as a journalist, what difference do you think that would make? It wouldn't be the end, obviously, because Britain is not East Germany, no question of that. So what difference would it make?
You mean the new legislation in this country?
Yeah, if you had legislation like the ones that Britain is trying to increase even now, and make it even worse.
Okay, I think the differences are this. The reality is that in most cases, in most official secrets cases that have been security based in the UK, there has been a de facto defense because juries do not like to convict in these cases. They don't like to convict journalists, and they don't like to convict people who look like they are doing what they're doing in the public interest. And so what has tended to happen is that the government will take these cases to the wire, and then they withdraw at the last minute because they're afraid that juries will come up with a perverse decision, i.e. they'll be ordered by a judge to convict and then they don't convict. And so that was the case in Catherine Gunn's, in the case of Catherine Gunn. It was taken right to the wire and then it was withdrawn. And so I think what has tended to happen over the years is that journalists have been emboldened by that. There haven't been huge disclosures, but from time to time it happens. And the press has felt that, well, when it comes to it, they're not really going to, they're really not going to go the whole way. The war on terror has shifted that a little bit, shifted the dial a little bit in favor of the government, and put public opinion more in favor of the government. But I think the one thing that will be hugely chilling to journalists is the increase in sentences. So, for instance, when I was involved in official secrecy cases where we as journalists faced conviction, we were looking at maybe 2 years in prison. Catherine Gunn was looking at 2 years in prison. The new sentences are, I think, 16 years. It's hugely different, and so the chilling effect is greater. And we're getting to the stage where the state is allowing itself. The state is providing legislation that will embolden it against journalists and against whistleblowers. That would be my reading.
But people say, well, there's this balance between the government's need to protect, the public's need to know, and we have a slightly adversarial proceeding here where the journalists are trying to get the information and the government is trying to protect it. It's kind of a game, and it works out pretty well. I would say it does not work out pretty well at all. Vietnam went in there a 30-year war essentially, but for the last 10 years of a big war with us, the French having pulled out earlier. That was not an example of the system working well. How about 30 years later, Iraq? We lied into Iraq to the same degree as was true in Vietnam. Everybody kept their mouths shut. How many thousands of people in the government knew actually they were heading toward war in Iraq at the time when President Bush was pretending still to await a congressional ruling on this and this and that? They kept their mouths shut. Hardly anybody's paid a price for that. The system, except millions of people in the Middle East have played with injury, refugee status, and death for that lying. So I would say that the system in neither country, remember, it comes back to me, of course, Britain, with Blair knowing that the US president was, as they say in the Downing Street memo, but was it cooking the evidence? There was another word for it, but was, do you remember the word in the Downing? They were doing something to the evidence that they were making it come out the way they wanted, fixing it, something. And it wasn't revealed. The Downing Street memo did come out much later in Britain. We didn't have an investigation like that, even in America. I mean, we didn't even have an investigation like that investigation in Britain. But at least they found afterwards what had gone on. But the performance of the British in joining the US in that clear-cut aggression, violation of the UN Charter in that invasion of occupation, does not do credit to the democracy, let's say, the degree of democracy in either of our countries. So,
well, I think the actually I think the phrase was "sexing up." You were perhaps censoring yourself there, Daniel, but that sexing up the evidence was the
that was one person said that. That's not actually the Downing Street memo, which,
no,
it was another
one. One thing that I'd actually like to bring in one particular guest that I've seen is with us this evening. There's Mary Inman, a good friend of mine, who's a world-renowned whistleblowing lawyer, and I believe she will be appearing on our screen as a panelist in just a moment. Hi, Mary. And one thing that I wanted Mary to address is the following. What's very clear from what we've been talking about tonight, and we are talking about security cases, is that in each of the cases, Reality's case, your case, Dan, in the case of Catherine Gunn, and in the case of Ed Snowden, in the case of Chelsea Manning, what we're talking about here is truths. These are people who are telling the truth about what's happening in their countries. And without being too naive about it, playing perhaps devil's advocate or perhaps angel's advocate, you should have been thanked. These people should have been thanked. Whistleblowing should be normalized. There should be mechanisms whereby people can tell the truth without these kinds of draconian sanctions. And I just wanted to bring Mary in because I know Mary has some thoughts about the normalization of whistleblowing. And so Mary, do you mind just maybe telling us your thoughts on the debate as a whole and the landscape of whistleblowing at the moment?
It's my pleasure to be here, a particular pleasure to share the stage with Brittany, Reality's sister, and with a hero of mine, Daniel Ellsberg, so thank you. I want to quote Dickens here, and in terms of the landscape that we find whistleblowers in at the moment, I think it's the best of times and the worst of times. And in particular, where it's the worst of times, we've seen it when it's a government whistleblower, when whistleblowers are exposing corruption, wrongdoing, negligence by the government. Where it's and so one of the most examples we haven't talked about today is sort of shocking to us is that Natalie Edwards, who's the FinCEN whistleblower, has been sentenced to 6 months in prison and 3 years of supervised leave. And again, she is someone in terms of this public interest. What she did, yes, she leaked suspicious activity reports and other things from our Treasury Department about whether banks, filings that banks should make about money laundering and potential terrorist financing and other things. What she has done is helped spur some of the most positive anti-money laundering legislation we've had in the United States in years. Yet she still sits in prison. So I put that on the worst of times. We have a ways to go. But the United States government loves whistleblowers, and this is where it's the best of times, when those whistleblowers are helping them expose wrongdoing. So in something we have called the False Claims Act, whistleblowers can help the government launch a lawsuit to expose misappropriation of government monies. It's not just the federal government, 30 of our states have it. The federal government has returned over $46 billion as a result of cases initiated by whistleblowers. The important part is those whistleblowers have been paid $7 billion for bringing that information forward. So what I think is the hypocrisy here is that there's a recognition by the government that whistleblowers need a financial safety net when it is helping the government prosecute cases as one of their top enforcements, their top tips. But when you are exposing the government, not only do we not pay whistleblowers, we criminalize their behavior. So I keep hoping that the rise of the star of the whistleblower, and we've seen so many whistleblowers with in the European communities with Wirecard, with FX manipulation, with LIBOR manipulation, all these massive scandals have been revealed by whistleblowers. We're finally getting to a place to pay them, to give them the safety net, and yet we can't then take this model and put it when it's on the government side. So that was my first just sort of general takeaway in terms of where we stand, is that I didn't want it all to be gloom and doom. I do think that we do lionize and appreciate whistleblowers and make movies about them in certain circumstances, but we are really hypocritical in how we treat them.
Thank you, Mary. Now we're coming to the end of our time. I do want both Brittany and Daniel to have their sort of final word. We have had a question from the audience about what one measure each of you would bring in to improve the lot of whistleblowers. I mean, just drawing on Mary's point, it'd be interesting to know what price you would put on reality's saving the 2020 election. It's a pretty huge sum that the government should really be paying her, perhaps, for rescuing that election for them, or at least contributing to that. But yes, it would be great if Brittany, you could maybe sum up your thoughts from this evening and perhaps give an idea of what one thing that could be done to make things better, and then we'll finish on Daniel.
Absolutely. So Daniel already alluded to this, but the Espionage Act needs to be either amended or repealed, or there needs to be some really serious thought put into the Espionage Act and whether it's applicable anymore in this new age, and whether we can allow people who are whistleblowers to defend themselves in court. And of course, and I'm sure everybody on this call believes that whistleblowers should be able to talk about why they leaked a document. Reality should have had a trial with a jury of her peers where she got on the stand and said, I leaked this document because. And the reason I'm not, speculating, which I have in the article that I wrote, but it's only speculation, because the truth is, Reality, if she does not receive a pardon, will never be able to tell you why she leaked the document. If Reality Winner, my sister, does not receive a pardon, she will never be able to talk to anyone about why she leaked the document, about any of her time while she was in the Air Force or while she was an NSA contractor. Reality will never be able to tell anyone. Reality will never be able to write a book about her life. I can't write a book. My mom can't write her book. My daughter, who is 8 months old, cannot write a book about her aunt, Reality Winner. The government has, in Reality's plea deal, prevented Reality from financially benefiting, and not just Reality, her whole family, whether those family members are born yet or not. So, we're actually not asking for any money from the government for the wonderful service that Reality provided and the sacrifices that she's made. All we want is a presidential pardon so that Reality can live her life and that this nightmare can be behind us.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Daniel, do you have some final thoughts?
Yes, I have to say I'm a little puzzled by that, Brittany, and I'd like to know more. Obviously, what you're describing is intolerable, but I'm a little puzzled by it. I have to know more. For example, I don't see how a plea bargain by Reality could possibly affect members of her family or others from writing on this and telling about it. And I'm disturbed to hear that the plea bargain, I wasn't aware of it in other cases, involved, I'd like to see the details of that, an inability even to write about this thing. For example, with clearance, in theory, she's supposed to clear stuff, but that doesn't keep her from putting it in. You notice that a very distinct enemy of our democracy, Constitution as written, John Bolton, did publish a book, which the president tried to enjoin, actually, and didn't succeed in doing so, and he didn't get it cleared. One other thing I'd like to, I think it comes out from all these comments, the non-legal consequences of the prosecution, whatever, I think are very hard to avoid by any means. In theory, you protect the whistleblowers. In practice, whistleblower protection acts have done very little. They mainly identify the whistleblower to their agency and lead to, I wouldn't advise people to go through the process in general if they have something to put out, not to identify themselves as the source of that by going to the IG, Inspector General, in general. One other, but we could at least, as she says, as Brittany says, we could at least remove or try to remove the criminal aspects of that, the criminalization of this through the Espionage Act or any other act, and that should be changed. On the question of who does this, I took issue and I couldn't help but intervene when Brittany said that Reality was a unique case of a woman being prosecuted for this. Of course, we have Catherine Gunn to start with in this case. You could say Chelsea Manning, by the way. But the Anne Wright, for example, was among those who resigned before as a colonel and a member of the Foreign Service, rather than bear testimony in favor of the Iraq policy beforehand. And Martin, in the case of Catherine Gunn, I was close to that. You were, of course, closer to it. But my impression at the time was that the government had not been playing chicken in the sense that they intended to drop that trial from the very beginning or even 2 days before. My impression is, could be wrong, that they drew the consequences of seeing the name Elizabeth Wilmshurst on the witness list just on the day they were supposed to go to trial. Now, Elizabeth had left the Foreign Service over Iraq, having found the official opinion as the highest civil servant working on this, that the war would be illegal without a second resolution by the UN. And she knew that the Solicitor General had actually reached that same opinion and then had been forced by American pressure and others to change it, basically. But she couldn't put that out secretly, that secret out, except as a witness in a criminal trial under oath. And so she was available as a witness for that. And when they saw that the highest civil servant definitely was a woman in this case who was prepared to testify in court that Catherine Gunn's impression as a non-lawyer had been right, that she was being asked, we were using illegal means to get support for an illegal war. And that was testimony they did not want in a courtroom. And so it got dropped. Whether that was the main reason or not, we don't know, but it certainly seemed to be.
She never got her day in court either. Well, look,
she did testify later in 2010 to the hearing that was never held in the U.S., where she did, and then someone did leak out the Solicitor General's opinion, which
the
had been the
attorney,
same.
the
Yeah,
attorney general. The attorney general.
Attorney General. Did I say it wrong? Yes.
But
Sorry.
look, we're going to have to wrap up now. We've already gone over our time, and I just wanted to thank you, Brittany, so much for talking. I know that it's all still very raw for you. Daniel, thank you so much, as ever, incredibly eloquent. And Mary, thank you for coming at the last minute there to give something of an overview. We're delighted at Index to be publishing this Whistleblower special. Thank you as well to all the members of the audience who came along this evening. And one day, maybe we'll be able to do this in person. So thank you very much.
And I hope I can pursue this after the program with several of you. There's lots of you left to learn about this that I want to.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.